Welcome to the Go Use Australia podcast. It's the podcast for Australian shooters who just want the political interference taken out of shooting.
So welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded and Gun Traders Australia. Now, many shooters, not just those in Western Australia, have obviously seen the laws that have come into effect in that state and the regulations as well, and the number of things that have changed for shooters, all for the worst. You will also be aware that the upper house of the West Australian State Parliament recently passed a motion to review the Firearms Act. And this is an opportunity for shooters like yourself to tell the committee about your concerns and experiences around the Firearms Act and the regulations because of the concerns that exist. And that motion was moved, you might recall, by Nick Goran from the Liberal Party in the upper house, and we interviewed him not long ago, and the link to that is up the top there if you're watching this on YouTube. So what we have been waiting for is the announcement of the details around the review and how it would work and when submissions would need to be provided by. In fact, the answer to that is the 4th of July. So that's not far off. So if you're a shooter and you're wanting to make a submission to the review, then you need to get your skates on because there's not much time. The committee itself has to provide its report within 3 months of when the motion was passed, which was the 28th of May. So that brings us to June, July, August. But that's the report. The actual window for making a submission, which will then give the committee enough time to go through the submissions and then provide the report, that window closes in the first week of July. So how do you make a submission? If you go to, this is just one example, go to Google and you do a web search on Standing Committee on Legislation WA, you'll see this link. So if you press the link, it'll take you to the committee's page. But there's a problem. What you can see there is that there are no inquiries listed. So what's going on? The answer to that is, in fact, the Google link will take you to the past committees page. What you want to do is go to the current committees page. So if you either go to the West Australian Parliament webpage and look up parliamentary business, then look up legislation committee, that'll take you to the current version of the page, which has the review listed. And you'll also see over here that it tells you when submissions are due, the 4th of July. So if you want to make a submission, it's important, first of all, to click the link and then go to the terms of reference. Now, the terms of reference will tell you what the committee has been asked to look at. It also tells you by omission what it can't look at. So it's a fairly broad but narrow focus. It's looking at the whole of the Act, but it's not looking at, for example, government policy. So if you want to make a submission, it should be in relation to the operation of the Act or the regulations, and that can be your observations, it could be your concerns, it could be other things that you want to make a submission on. That will be good information for the committee that will then enable it to make its final report. Joining our Patreon channel means you can see episodes of Gun News Australia as soon as they come out, which means you can see them before they're published more widely. Plus, we'll be running Friday night live streams exclusively for members. It's a great way to support our work while getting the news you want to hear. So sign up as a member at patreon.com/Politics Reloaded. In order to make a submission, what you can do is send it to this email address on the bottom right-hand corner of that page, either the main page or the terms of reference page. It doesn't matter because this right-hand column, I think, is common to all their pages. And so that email address is lclc@parliament.wa.gov.au. So it's also important to know that public submissions will obviously appear in the public submissions tab when they're received, And there'll be other information, the hearings and transcripts, which we posted in due course. So that's how you do it. And it can be in the form of a letter, it can be in an email, it can be in whatever is convenient. What I would strongly recommend is that you don't write pages and pages and pages of one big story unless either you've broken it up into relevant sections, but also it's got to be digestible. So I know we've got a lot on our chest to say about these laws, but try to make it readable. It may be that you've got other evidence and annexures that you want to attach. That's fine. Do that by all means, but make it easy to follow. Now, we have already provided our submission, and that I'll actually take you through it now because it's important. I think that you know where we're coming from. Now, because we're not resident of WA, we're limiting our comments not so much to the experiences on a day-to-day basis, but more to do with some of the principles that sit behind the legislation. The things that we wanted to draw attention to are mostly to do with the way that West Australia complies or doesn't comply with the National Firearms Agreement. So we have provided a number of recommendations, and I'll take you through them briefly now. So by way of explaining this to the committee of members who don't know really the history of where the Firearms Act comes from or the National Firearms Agreement, we set out where to find the National Firearms Agreement. Now, it was originally signed in 1996, as you would all know, but it was updated in 2017. So we're pointing to the 2017 version. The things that we're drawing attention to are, one, that in WA, firearms have to be licensed. The NFA doesn't require that. What happens in other states is that a permit to acquire is issued to a user. You're then given 28 days or whatever to go and buy the firearm you want. It's a one-off transaction. I keep harking back to the fact in Victoria it's $9.20. I think it's a bit more in other states, but it's not much. Whereas Western Australia has an annual licensing regime, and to license a firearm for the first time is, I think, $445. So work that one out. And our recommendation, obviously, is to abolish that licensing system and go to the permit to acquire system. The second one is about the hard limits on the number of firearms that shooters can own, because it's very arbitrary. The National Firearms Agreement does not have that. The National Firearms Agreement has the genuine reason test, which really is a more tailored system, which says that if you can demonstrate you're a member of a club or you need to go hunting, you can buy firearms for that, and there are no limits as such. It's all to do with matching what you need with what you will use. The third one is the failure of Western Australia to provide mutual recognition of interstate licenses. May not be an issue for those of you in WA, but certainly if you are an interstate person wanting to come to WA, it's just one of those impediments that doesn't need to be there because the National Firearms Agreement requires mutual recognition of licenses. And you will have noticed from one of my recent postings that WA Police have now issued a new form that if you are a West Australian shooter and you're wanting to travel interstate with your firearms, guess what? You have to fill in a form. Nobody else does that. The West Australia system also specifies the carriers that can carry firearms. Again, that is not required under the National Firearms Agreement. There are clauses that set out principles that apply to the transportation of firearms. So our recommendation is to abolish the current list and adhere to the clauses in the NFA. It's pretty straightforward. The fifth area is to abolish property letters, because again, that is not required under the National Firearms Agreement. And it's no wonder why West Australia has got itself tied up in knots over it, because it's gone off on its own and it created a system where there are no winners. The sixth area is that travel form, which I just mentioned. The seventh area is the requirement for the mental and physical health checks. Again, not required under the NFA. And in fact, there is that broader fit and proper person test that police can apply. And why can't they apply that if a person is simply not suitable for whatever reason to get a license. And I am making the point that they really need to rely on the judgment of shooting clubs and associations to make those calls rather than people in the registry. The eighth area is that WA requires serviceability certificates. That is, when you acquire a firearm, you've got to get a certificate. It costs you $25 or whatever it is from a dealer that basically attests that the firearm is in working condition. Not required under the NFA, and they serve no known purpose. So get rid of them. The ninth and last area that I'm highlighting are the new safe storage requirements. The NFA doesn't really specify safe storage specs, but because there's no data that underpins this. So what I'm suggesting is that the WA requirements should mirror what happens in other jurisdictions, and to rely on the expertise of shooting clubs and associations once again to advise government on what works and what doesn't. Now, the one provision of the NFA, and I'm saying in this submission, that WA should not comply with, is that the NFA talks about licensing people from the age of who have reached the age of 18 or over. That's not on. It's because other jurisdictions license users from age to 11 or 12. Half of the Olympic shooting team that represents Australia started as minors. You've got Russell Mark, who was a national shotgun champion at 16, so having a license limit of 18 doesn't work. And I'm making the very clear point that holding a license does not equate to being able to own a firearm. Because I think some people who aren't across this would be confused, thinking, well, we don't want 15-year-olds running around with their own shotguns. No, it doesn't work that way. All this does is authorize the user to use a firearm at a range or wherever, and ownership remains the province of adults, and that's a position which we're saying actually works, and what so we're not looking to change it. Then I've got a section which deals with the way the government has approached this whole matter, the way it's treated shooters, and this draws up a lot of those previous examples that you'll be aware of. There was that 50 caliber stunt at the Pinjar range. There was Papalia's suggestion that if you don't like the new laws, then get another hobby. There was his propensity to get photo opportunities wherever he could with firearms. The lack of consultation when the draft act was circulated. The publishing of the maps, which was just disgraceful, and the setting of fees in WA, which, unlike other states, when fees are set, they're proposed in a document called a regulatory impact statement, which is made publicly available, and it's an opportunity for people to make a submission saying these fees are wrong because they don't take account of X, Y, Z, or whatever it is. That doesn't happen in Western Australia. In Western Australia, fees are set by the Department of Treasury, and there are no reasons given. So it can be done for punitive or political reasons that fees are high. And as I said before, you're licensing a firearm $445. That's a tax. That's what that is. Now, so we've listed the recommendations basically to support those things which we've listed. The other thing which we draw attention to is that clause 2I of West Australian Firearms Act states that one of the objectives of the Act, now usually objectives are spelled out at the start of legislation, saying this Act seeks to achieve to do ABCD. Item I is to facilitate a nationally consistent approach to the control of firearms. I'll say that again. To facilitate a nationally consistent approach to the control of firearms. In other words, they want to meddle with the NFA. And what I'm saying is no way. What I'm saying is that they need to, first of all, comply with the NFA themselves before they even have any aspirations to fiddle with it. And that if they want to make any changes, they need to go through a public consultation, a genuine public consultation process. But otherwise, they're going to go down the same path they did before and make a mess of it. The last section I have in my submission is about the role of the regulator, being West Australian Police, and how They have, for example, applied NATO templates to civilian ranges. And I'm saying that's completely unreasonable. And also, West Australia Police does not have expertise in this area. The body that has expertise are those organisations that are affiliated to the International Shooting Sports Federation, ISSF. That is the body, that is the pathway that takes you from club shooting to the Olympics, to the Commonwealth Games and World Cups, World Championships. Now, this isn't the only international organisation, but what I'm saying is if you want expertise, that's an obvious one, because they do this, that they have a presence in 149 countries, they have 140 employees, and they convene general assemblies every 2 years. They know what they're doing. What they do, there's no such thing as a cookie cutter template for a range as such, but the range safety methods are managed by what they call technical delegates, who are people who are qualified, have expertise in these things. So, and there's plenty of those in Western Australia. So my recommendation is that Western Australia Police defer all safety matters to ISSF delegates for instruction that they, being police, must act on. So that is the submission. That is the process. So the links to all these things are in the description to this video. So look, get writing, and hope you make the deadline of the 4th of July. Thanks very much, and we'll see you later. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gun News Australia. And if you're a supporter through Patreon, you'll get access to early release of the episodes as soon as they're uploaded. And you'll also get access to our Friday night live streams. So to support our work, simply go to patreon.com/politics reloaded, or use the QR code on the screen, or see the description in this episode for details.